Hi, everyone. Good Wednesday to you all. I'm going to introduce myself real quick and then we'll dive right into gin and perfume equals BFFs. I'm Molly Troupe. I have been in the industry for about 14 years. I'm getting to the point now where I don't remember exactly how long it's been. I started my career doing quality control in a larger refinery. And then I have worked in a lot of different production roles, mostly throughout Oregon. My most recent role before I started consulting was at Freelance Spirits in Portland, Oregon. And I designed a lot of different gin recipes in my time there, as well as a few other more specialty items. And through that whole exploration and through my entire career, I've really been able to explore different botanicals. So let's get into a little bit of why we're talking about perfume in the context of spirits. So, like I said, botanicals. That's a lot of the basis for gin. And in that exploration of gin, I have been able to teach some gin classes. I've been able to work with other people and really just take in a lot of information. There's a gin class that I teach every once in a while in Kentucky at the Brewing and Distilling Analytical Services Lab, BDAS. Shout out to Gary Spedding. And I'm a huge admirer of his work, and being in his lab is just being, kid in a candy store. You're seeing all these different great reference materials, all these good, books to learn and read from. And I was looking at his lab and I realized he had a bunch of perfume books. And it brought back some um, memories of, prior life of, making perfume, like being very small and making, what I'm calling perfume, but was really just flowers and water, and exploring that platform and how botanicals interact differently in that. And so I was looking at these reference books, and I just had this moment where I was like, oh, these are very related, more related than I had thought in my adult life. And it just led to a further obsession of botanicals and how we use them in the world, in the context of gin, and then how we can learn from the perfume world to make better products. So before we get a little bit into a very niche topic, we're just going to go through some basics of what is gin and what is perfume. So gin, oh, and I shall mention, if my voice gives out at the end, it's because I am recovering, but we're here, we're doing it. It'll be great. So what is gin? Gin is a global spirit. It has deep roots in as a Dutch liquid courage. It has deep roots as a specific London dry spirit. A lot of history with this product, and it is made globally. It's enjoyed globally. So you can see more and more now there are very small distilleries throughout all different places in the world that are using local ingredients to make very cool products. I got to work on a distillery in Maui that's using some, local botanicals to really emphasize their terroir and to make something very unique. And there's products like that anywhere. There's a lot of different research, a lot of different products in India that are using very specific Indian ingredients. And we're seeing this really big expansion into into this category where there's still a lot of juniper forward. There is a little bit more play with what juniper forward is. And we are seeing more contemporary style where juniper might not be the highlighted ingredient as much, but it is still there, I hope. So gin doesn't have a ton of requirements for making it. When we're talking about something like bourbon, there's very specific things you have to do, not to mention that you technically cannot make bourbon anyplace else other than the United States. For gin, that definition can change a little bit regionality. In the UK, they're much more strict about the high proof alcohol that you're using and what that is distilled to. I think it's around 96% alcohol. And in the US, not as much. You still generally see high proof neutral used, but it can be closer to what 192, so a little bit different. You can also produce something that's more of the Geneva style in the US and call it gin. I'm not sure that you can do that in the UK. But the one thing we can all agree about is that it has to have juniper in it. That juniper doesn't necessarily have to be the same varietal. The varietal can change from space to space. Juniper is this really interesting plant in that it can be found on almost every continent. It was formed in Pangaea, so it's a very old plant. And when Pangaea broke up, a lot of this juniper remained, and now it's just been separated and has shifted a lot. You can see a lot of different terpene structures and plant structures based on where it is grown. In Oregon, we have a lot of juniper, and it can be a little bit more on the cat pea footy side than some other varietals like Italian or Macedonian, which we see largely in production. But they're all just different aspects and different flavors that you can pull in different directions. And again, the other thing that it doesn't necessarily have to be in there to a large extent, but is really fun to play with when you're making gin is botanicals. So there's so many different categories of botanicals. There's spice, there's citrus, there's roots, there's more fresh ingredients, there's fruit, there's a whole world that you can use. And there's a lot of different distillation styles in which you can achieve these botanicals as well. You can do just traditional heated distillation. You can also do vacuum distillation. And in totality, you are going to make a very unique spirit, even if you are only using the 3 triumvirate ingredients, juniper, coriander, and angelica root. Even those 3 ingredients, if you're using different techniques or different places, you're going to produce something different than your neighbor. And that's what makes gin so fun to play with. There is no real wrong way as long as it's drinkable and does well in a cocktail. You're making something that's going to be hopefully your own expression. So let's talk about what perfume is. Perfume is also a global product. It is enjoyed around the world. It has rich history in its usage and production. I was actually just talking or enjoying a presentation from the Institute of Art and Olfaction about ancient Egypt and perfume made there and how big of a fan Cleopatra was to perfume, which I think is something that we generally know. And one of the things we also know as part of the distillation history is, distillation itself, you can date back to ancient Egypt, which in that time was used for making perfume. Perfume, there's a lot of different styles. It is traditionally, if you go back to ancient Egypt, they weren't using alcohol at that time. We weren't able to use high proof alcohol because it didn't really exist in that platform, but we did have oil. So jojoba, any kind of oil, coconut, a little bit harder to work with, but you can make an interesting solid, I'm sure, historically. And that's kind of how we would make perfume, with oil and then botanicals that generally have been extracted, although there's a lot of different extraction techniques when it comes to pulling out flavor from botanicals. But that is historically botanical focused product. We now are in a more modern age for production. So perfume can mean a lot more things. We have the ability to use high proof alcohol. So we have a different ability to create a throw for an ingredient versus a solid or even a roll-on product. That means that we're able to express botanicals a little differently, because prior to being able to use alcohol, we were limited to ingredients that did well and were soluble in oil. And now we can use ingredients that are more soluble in ethanol. So that broadens what you can do tremendously, not to mention that the ingredient world for perfume has expanded beyond your mind, where we're not just using natural products, which are essential oils, roughly. We are able to use natural isolates. So it's ingredients that are isolated from plants, but are more singular than a very complex essential oil. For example, you can use an isolated alpha pinene if you really want to make something that's more gin forward, as that's one of the major terpenes in juniper. So you can make something and highlight more of a juniper forward category by using a natural isolate. You also have a whole synthetics market, which has come, I mean, I think it's been around for roughly 100 years. And a good reason for perfume to, work on that is because natural ingredients are sometimes very expensive to work with, for one. Two, they're also very complex. There are, over 200 different ingredients or natural isolates you can find in like juniper. That's a lot of different things to consider when you're working and pairing it with other ingredients. As gin makers know that, and perfume knows that too. So sometimes they will make synthetic ingredients that are, more of a whisper of it, and they're also more cost effective when you go into production. But synthetics also give you the ability to use things that are more ethical. So, ambergris has a history as whale something. I forget exactly where it comes from, but it's part of a whale. And the only way to really get it is not very vegan friendly. So you can make something that's like that through a synthetic and not actually cause harm. So there is some really positives to synthetics as well. And something that, most distillers have not considered ever playing with, because it's not something I think a lot of us think about drinking, and we're generally working in the basis of just botanicals and how we can use those botanicals to make a great expression. Okay, so dialing down onto commonalities between perfume and gin. Both use alcohol for the sake of this presentation. We both use botanicals, and we're both consumer packaged goods. So we have a lot in common, and maybe a lot to learn from when it comes to research for perfume. So when we're developing recipes for gin, I'm going to put my gin distiller hat on. Think about, we're being asked to make a new product. And let's say there's a specific ingredient you want to use. I'm going to go back to making like a floral product. So let's say we're using lavender. And any gin distiller knows the lavender is very interesting to play with because it is fantastic, but it is very overpowering if used even just a fraction too much. And sometimes when you go just a fraction too much, what you're going to get is soap instead of, a lavender latte. And that makes all the difference when you're going from a recipe standpoint. So let's think about, we're at our starting point. We're trying to figure out what lavender to use and how to use it. Something that we can do is look into different research, different papers that have been written for different lavender varietals that are basis on perfume. And you can look at percentage of ingredients, percentage of essential oils, a percentage of different isolates in that essential oil to see kind of what different ingredients you're going to end up getting in your gin. What different, like if our lavender has a higher amount of linalool, is that going to carry through? Is that what's going to make it soapy? Probably not, but it might. And then we can really use a lot of perfume research to understand what's going on in our botanicals and how that they can interact with each other. So it does take a lot of time to kind of go through these papers, and they can be very technical and chemistry heavy. You can get into, the exact kind of composition of these botanicals, but it can save a lot of time versus having to necessarily do the distillations. You still might end up having to do it, but you might have a little bit more of an informed guess going into it than you thought before. It can also, when you're, working with your own lavender varietal. So for, say like you're growing your own, it's your own, lavender farm. That sounds so fun. And you want to know more about your varietal and how to interact, you can somewhat look into that a little bit more with perfume ingredients and decide what you, or come up with a hypothesis and where you think that this lavender is going to fall in terms of flavor spectrum. Hopefully that's all like helpful information, and it helps you to make more informed guesses and make quicker answers to your questions. So in summary, it helps with industry problems and information gaps that we sometimes have as distillers, where there is just not a lot of information in botanicals, and how they're used and all that stuff. There's just limited information specifically for spirits. We can take a lot of that perfume work that has been done that is accessible and try to use it for our own gain. Okay, so this has been my little topic of hyperfixation in the last, I don't even know how long, for a while. So we have a fixative issue, for lack of a better term. In gin, we use fixatives like orris root or angelica root. And we talk about how those help, basically our botanicals be more cohesive, that they are making things stay in solution a little bit longer, and they, make the flavor last. That's kind of what a fixative is supposed to do. And we have primarily been thinking that because of perfume research. So a lot of the information we have for orris root is that it's a fixative. It has this violet kind of flavor from it. And it has been used historically in perfume for that. So let's talk a little bit about how orris root is used in this, in the perfume world. So orris is the rhizome of an iris plant. The picture in this slide is of a bearded iris. It is Iris germanica, which is one of the varietals that can be used to collect rhizomes. I believe that there's 3 in total, and a lot of them are grown in the Mediterranean, although they can be grown in other places of the world. It just depends on their habitat. So these plants, they need about 2 years or so in the ground to reach maturity. Once they have, we perfumers, probably not them, botanics, people who farm, they are going to take this iris, they are going to separate the rhizomes, they are going to let them dry. They are going to let them dry for the course of about 2 to 3 years. From there, we're going to take that dried rhizome, and we're going to grind it up into a fine flour, and we're going to steam distill it. So that then at that point, you have created an orris butter. An orris butter is, you think it could be called an essential oil because it's basically that, it is the essential oil of the orris root. The only reason we call it orris butter is because it's actually a solid. Most essential oils are not solids. The reason it's solid is it has a high level of myristeric acid, just like coconut oil, and so that makes it solid. So at that point, we have our nice orris root, and we can take that and we can use it in perfume. And it's going to be this beautiful, delicate violet flavor. It's going to be a fixative. We're only going to use it sparingly because it's also very, very expensive. I think it's, a reduction of maybe 1% yield at the ultimate end, because there is all these different steps that you have to do in order to get there. And, at the end of it, you're using just a minimal amount, and it's making a huge impact. It really does have an fixative effect. And I want to talk about why that is. In the aging process, that very important 2 to 3 years, where you have those rhizomes pulled out of the earth, and they're sitting there in a very dry environment, dark as well, we're having some oxidation happen, and we're taking things that are breaking down, and we are forming irones. So irones, they're alpha, beta, and gamma. They are what's considered the fixative for orris root. lots of other stuff is happening. It's a complex system. It's a, it's more than that, but that is what we know to be the fixative part of orris root. A lot of flavor comes along as well. And so when you're getting just, fresh, unaged orris root, it's more of a bitter green quality to it, not necessarily bad. It's just not violet. We are going to, it's important for this oxidation to happen, and it does take a while. There is some research to show that you can expedite it a little bit, but it still just takes time to go from A to B. So in Perfume, you're using those, and you have created alpha, beta, and gamma iron, and you're having those in your final product. That's great. So we have looked into the research. That's Perfume. Here's an interesting question. Oh, I already talked about that. That's not how we use it in gin. Primarily the orris root that we're using in gin has not been aged. It has been, and primarily it's not been aged for that long. It has been dried. It has not generally been dried for 2 to 3 years. We do not usually use it steam distilled. We are using it, put the root in and use it in our botanical bill. So the research that we've been using up to this point from Perfume for gin, particularly for orris root, has it misled us to believe that orris root is a fixative. And it's maybe not. So this is something that's been bugging me, because it's a total gap in research where we are having this ingredient that we've been using historically, that we think we know why we're doing it, but maybe we don't. So this is where, are we not BFFs? Generally speaking, we are. So there is so much research that has been done for ingredients that we can absolutely use to support what we are doing, and it makes total sense. However, there is a point to be careful, because maybe it isn't lined up, or maybe it's an assumption that we've been making as makers, where this needs more research. And, I think when it comes to research, people don't really have time or resources to do it, but maybe that'll change. Maybe we don't need orris root in our botanical bills. Maybe it is an expensive ingredient, because even if we're not, using it in the same way. I think the last time I looked into pricing from like an organic orris root, it was roughly $30 a pound. So it is one of the more expensive botanicals that gin distillers can still use. That's not how much it would cost to use the orris butter. Orris butter would probably be, I think the last time I looked at a pound, it was in the thousands of dollars. So is it something that should just be omitted and we no longer use? This is, questions that I have that I don't really have answers to. But I want to bring you along this journey to understand that we have a lot to learn from the perfume world. There is so many great resources. There are so many fun things that we can learn and use, in that I want you all to join me too. And knowing that there are plenty of things that might not translate completely, and what we should be wary about, and supporting research on topics that will help us gain more insight into what we're doing as well. So if anyone has a lab that they like to loan me, please let me know, because I am tempted to just figure this out myself. But if not, I'm also happy to answer any comments or questions. I know that there is a comment or a comment board, and so we can certainly put those comments in through there. I forgot to mention at the beginning that I'd take any questions at the end, but I'm happy to do that. By the way, if you want to get in touch and don't want to ask a question. I don't have one now, and something pops up later, you can get in touch. I have 2 different businesses. One of them is Troupe Spirits Consulting. That is where I do spirits consulting. A lot of fun. I do a lot of research and development for different brands, and I do some operations management as well. And then there is my Duality Fragrance Company. That is more of a consumer packaged goods. My relaunch with new custom glass and packaging is coming in June, which my eyes are wide because all the bottles just finished production and should be shipping soon. So everyone cross your fingers for me that they get here safely. Very excited to fill them and to start that anew. My focus with that is with using essential oils and natural isolates and ethanol. So right up the alley of gin, and creating some really interesting fragrances that help to tell stories of the complex human life. So I don't see any comments coming in. Oh, perfect. We are good. So thank you for having me. Thank you for being here and joining me on this journey, and looking forward to hearing questions, comments, or feedback. Thank you.